Hey, everybody, and welcome once again to Nose in the Book, a Bible reading commentary with me, your host, Pastor Justin Van Reed. Great to have you with me once again as we consider four more chapters from the Word of God. We have before us from the Old Testament Leviticus chapter 20, and from the book of Psalms, Psalm 25. From Ecclesiastes, we'll look at chapter 3, and then from the New Testament, we have 1 Timothy chapter 5. Again, if there's anything from these chapters that I don't discuss or any questions that you have that you would like me to answer, please feel free to post any comments or questions in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to get to those and answer those. Otherwise, here's what we have before us. In Leviticus chapter 20, we have a number of commands that God has previously given, especially if you'll remember in chapter 18 and 19, where there was a lot of various commands that were given. They're repeated here, but now with punishments. And you'll notice that many of these are punishable by death or by being cut off. And some take that to mean that punishable by death would be something that the community would have to do, that the community would have to find these people guilty of these sins and then take care of it. And then they see being cut off as something that God would do, and actually cutting off the person himself from the people. So it's not just a removal from the people, but rather God doing this. As he says in verse 5, I myself will turn against them and their families and will cut them off from the community. And so he goes through a number of things here, as I said, similar to laws we've seen before. Worshiping false gods, committing various sexual sin, and just a number of other things here. Breaking food laws, animal laws, all of these kinds of things. Even the visiting with mediums and such. So you'll notice that most of these are punishable by death or by being cut off. So that's Leviticus chapter 20, and it's a list of punishments. Then we come to Psalm 25. And here we have another psalm of David, and here David once again is talking about, at least initially, his trust in the Lord. How he says, "I give my life to you, and I trust in you, and teach me, lead me." So he asks for the Lord's help here. Lead me by your truth, teach me, for you are the God who saves me. Remember me. All of this. One of the differences, though, here in this psalm versus a lot of the psalms we've seen previous, where we've heard a lot of similar language from David. We've seen him say a lot of similar things to what he says here about trusting in the Lord and calling out for the Lord. Normally in his psalms, he turns and talks about the Lord's deliverance, the Lord's provision, the Lord's answering and going against his enemies and dealing with his enemies. But here he actually ends with lament. He says, starting in verse 16, "Turn to me and have mercy, for I am alone and in deep distress. My problems go from bad to worse. Save me from them all." And he just talks about his pain. "Protect me, Lord. Rescue my life from them. His enemies are coming against him. May integrity and honesty protect me, for I put my hope in you." So, it's almost as though in this case, he's not reflecting like he has previously on the fact that God has answered, but still the whole thing is a prayer. I trust in you. I need your help. And Lord, it's getting really bad. That's kind of one of the unique things we have here in Psalm 25. All right, then turning our attention to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I'll do my best not to sing. As we see here, there is a time for everything, turn, and every activity under heaven. Beautiful poem to start off the chapter here with all the various aspects of life, right? So it's kind of a merism here of just going back to the extremes of life, right? Born, die, plant, harvest, kill, heal, all of these various opposites, if you will, showing that there's a time for everything in life, which is what he starts with here. But then he goes on here, and this is, I think, an important point to make after the poem, is not just that the observation that there's a time for everything, but that it's God who is sovereign and has made the time for everything, has established the time for everything. And so as he says here in verse 11, yet God has made everything beautiful for its time, or in its time. and he also has planted eternity in the human heart. And so there's a need to recognize the sovereignty of God in all of the events of life, that God is working all of this out, and to look beyond just the events of life and to look to the Lord. He's placed eternity in our hearts, but he says, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So there's a time for everything, and God's sovereign, he's doing it, but he's not necessarily going to reveal that to us, and there's going to be a lot in life that we don't see or understand. And so what's his conclusion here is that people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. So enjoy whatever it is that God puts in, right? Recognizing and living under the sovereign hand of God, recognize that, and then walk in that. And there's joy in that. There's enjoyment in that. That, okay, I can trust, when it's going not so well, there's great trust in the Lord. When it's going so well, and it's easier, you might say, from a worldly perspective, just from an experiential perspective. I trust in the Lord, and I do everything for the glory of God. And so I can, the different varying times of life are not so scary. And so just love that conclusion there. There's nothing better than to be happy, enjoy ourselves as long as we can, right? Not just in a purely hedonistic sense, but in the receiving everything as a gift from God, as he says in verse 13. Then he goes on here and talks about another, it's really, the chapter break is not here, but maybe it could be, because he goes on to talk about the injustices of life. Another observation that he makes here, which is that there's injustice in the courts, as he says. But he also said, in due season God will judge everyone for all their deeds. So he recognizes ultimately God again is in control, and what is right and good will win out. And he also thinks about here and observes the human condition, and how there's a certainty to the end of life, that there's no guarantee of that there's no difference between human life and animal life, as he points out, in the sense that just as animals die, so humans die. So then again he comes back to this: nothing better for people than to be happy in their work. That is our lot in life, and no one can bring us back to see what happens after we die. So there's this wisdom in trusting in the Lord and leaving the Lord's business up to the Lord, and then just walking and living in light of that with great faith and trust in God, and enjoying the things that, and the days, however long he gives you. Recognize there's just such a great rest in this, of recognizing the Lord has ordained everything in its time. And what a comfort to our hearts that brings. All right, then turning lastly here to the New Testament in 1 Timothy chapter 5. And we have here, first of all, just various commands throughout these last two chapters of Timothy. First, we have Paul calling for the care of the elderly, older men and women. Especially he focuses here on the women, especially widows. And he gives some qualifications for widows that would be taken care of by the church. The clear instruction here, and several times in the chapter, is that everyone should be cared for by their relatives. If you have living family, that's the first group that should be taking care of them. It shouldn't be a burden to the church if there's family. Let family take care of them. But then if they need, if they don't have family, say they're an older widow, as he points out, over 60, then they ought to be helped out by the church and make sure that the church kind of becomes like their family. But for the younger widows, he doesn't think that that they should be a burden or support by the church, but rather that they should remarry, that it would be best for them, if right. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about a whole thing of marriage and singleness. Paul clearly elsewhere in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 commends singleness, and if one can is called to that, absolutely, that's the way to go and the way that you can serve the Lord. But better to marry than to sin, and so must have been observing a lot of these younger women falling into various sinful activities, and so it would be best, as he says here, for them to remarry. And then he ends here with the pay for elders in the church. That this is something that he says several times in his letters. It's good to support those financially who labor in service to God. And then also he concludes here with various other commands that he kind of just rattles off. So that's all we have time for today. Hope you enjoyed these chapters from the Lord's Word. Leviticus chapter 20 and various consequences for sin, Psalm 25, and a trust in the Lord, even though it seems as though the Lord's not answering. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and trusting in the Lord in all the different times of life, and then also First Timothy 5, and especially caring for older men and women, the elders, the elderly, and making sure that if it's not family, then it's the church that is caring for them. All right, hope you enjoyed this time together. Until next time, keep your eyes on the Lord and your nose in the book. We'll see you again soon.